So, we got another comic review. What better way to start your day than with a good old-fashioned comic review, am I right? And today we're going to be talking about Dick Tracy, Volume 1. This was another book sent to me by my friend Chris. Chris, thank you once again, brother. And yeah, this is basically Mad Cave's reboot of the classic Dick Tracy book. Which, yeah, I don't think anyone's done anything with Dick Tracy for the longest time. I thought Dynamite had them because they had all the pulp characters. But Dick Tracy was a character, like, I've known about but never really got into. Probably because there were, like, so many other, like, pulp characters that, like, appealed to me more, like the Spider and the Shadow and a few others. But Chris sent this to me, and I was like, oh, cool. You know, okay, cool, it's a new reboot. I do have a understanding. I wouldn't say I'm a Dick Tracy expert, by no means by no stretch of the imagination. So there are characters that show up in this comic that I'm like, okay, I guess that's a Dick Tracy character. And I know that sounds really rough. But I think that's what kind of works for this reboot, is that it does introduce these characters, but it doesn't go out of its way to be like too homage-y to the classic series. You know, does that make any sense? Because this is, and also while it is a reboot, and it does have some darker, I'll get into the darker elements, but it's not like an overtly gritty reboot. But before I go any further, let's talk about the comic's creator. This is written by Alex Segura and Michael Marecci. Oh god, I butchered that name up so bad. I'm so sorry. With art and cover art by Geraldo Borges. I am going to mess these names up so bad. I'm sorry. Creative and colorist Mark Engelhart. And letters by Jim Campbell. So Mad Cave has, I've done a few Mad Cave books before, and a lot of them are good. A lot, like You've Been Cancelled is dumb, stupid fun. That's the biggest one I've done in recent, like, You've Been Cancelled was a dumb, stupid, satirical comic that was nothing short of just plain fun. But this and the other book from Mad Cave Chris sent me, which is another, IP that has now gotten the comic rights, that hasn't been seen in a while. We'll get to that one later. We'll get to that one in another time. But this I wanted to read because I'm always a fan of pulp stories and, you know, pulp era characters. So for those who don't know who Dick Tracy is basically a character who is from that era, and most of you guys will probably also know the Disney movie that Eisner put a lot of money into, and it didn't exactly work. I've seen that movie. It's not as awful as people make it out to be. It's actually a pretty solid movie. But I can understand why it didn't get the high praise as it did. Anyway, so Dick Tracy is a pulp era character. He's a detective who dresses in yellow, and you know him best for having that little wrist communicator thing. And in here, in this new take, he's basically he is back to being a detective, and he's back from the war because this is set in 1947. It's not your typical, like, it's not like a very, like your atypical pulp era, which is pre-World War II and post-World War I. Like, we're usually in the age of bootlegging and, you know, crimes and what have you. But the thing of it is that in here, it's a little, you know, it's a little wee bit different in the sense that, in here, this is like we're more closer to the 50s. Like, this is 2 years after the war, and Tracy himself is a World War II veteran who they don't really go too deep into his backstory. What they do basically say is that he did have some trouble with authority, but it was justified in protecting people's lives. So in this story, it starts with a mass murder in a cafe called the Green-Eyed Cafe. And a city alderman who is the father of the love interest for Dick Tracy, and it also it basically throws Dick and one of his old comrades, Pat Patton, as well as Miss Trueheart, who is again Dick Tracy's love interest. The three of them have to basically like wrap up and then figure out this mystery of why the city alderman was killed, while at the same time battling their way through a city that is very corrupt. you know, your typical story as is. So what I liked about this comic is that, like I said, this book isn't it while it is pretty gritty and does get pretty violent at times, it's not overtly violent. That's kind of the big thing, is that it's not an overtly violent comic. It's more along the lines of, yeah, people get shot, but it's not like people get like their guts ripped. This isn't like a Garth Ennis book. There are people who get shot in the head, and one guy gets shot in the head, and he's just like on the ground, like, yeah, he's trying to like talk, and I'm like, ooh. But that's kind of the thing. Like, I will always prefer, like, I always love some blood and guts. You guys know me if you've been on this channel long enough. You guys know that I'm a big fan of blood and guts. But the big thing is that if it's a character that isn't known for like bloody violence, don't do it like that. But here it makes sense. You know, people are going to get shot and they're going to get killed. Here, like, people get shot in the head a few times, but it's not like their brains spill everywhere, because then it just feels like you're being an edgelord if you do that. Here, the violence does serve a point. Now, the other thing is, let's talk, like, I really do love the artwork, too. It's just kind of this shadowy, kind of dark colors. And also, what I really like is how, and this is going to sound weird because, again, Dick Tracy wears a lot of yellow. You know, basically, he's the guy who's dressed in yellow. And they really make it a point of, like, no matter what color around in the scenery, like, whatever, like, kind of scenery that's going on, basically, no matter what, Dick Tracy is just, like, the bright color. Like, I think that's meant to, like, the artwork's really hammers home that Dick Tracy is the light of this city. Like, he's meant to be, like, the absolute light of this city and meant to protect it. So that's why he's so, like, no matter what, his yellow coat and hat are always the brightest thing, no matter how dark the other colors are. I don't know if that was intentional. I would love to pick the creative team's brain and the artist in general. I'd love to pick their brains about it. Like, was that intentional to make sure that Dick Tracy's colors were the brightest thing on every panel, or if that was just a happy accident? I really want to know. I'd love to like do an interview and pick their brains about it, but you know, what can I do, right? But yeah. Now the other thing is that we know Dick Tracy for having all these, like, this rogues gallery that is notoriously known for having all these really dumb names, like Flat Top, Prune Face, Shoulders, Muggsy, you know, hey, Prune Face, what do you got over there? It's shown here, and we do get a lot of villains, and a lot of them are already pre-established for this reboot. However, I will say it's kind of sad because some of these villains do get introduced, like these classic Dick Tracy villains do get introduced, and then they get killed. Like, they immediately get killed thereafter. So it does kind of suck that, you know, we have all these villains and you just kill them off in these pages. I mean, not all of them die. Like, just a few ones, but I'm like, at the same time, I'm like, man, I kind of wish you kept some of the rogues alive, but then again, that does leave the door open for other new villains to show up at one point or another. So that's always a good, like, as long as you can, like, fill that hole with some new villains, or maybe, like, not kill all of Dick Tracy's rogues gallery in here, because it is kind of massive. Anyway, so that's kind of, like, that was my one gripe. I was like, man, I may not be a Dick Tracy fan, but I'm never a big fan of, like, namelessly killing off villains, because that kind of lowers the rogues gallery, unless you got something planned, which I hope they do. Anyway, so do I recommend Dick Tracy Volume 1? That's the big question. At the end of it all, is Dick Tracy worth getting as a comic? I believe so. I think, like I said, I was never a big Dick Tracy guy. That's a sentence. Big Dick Tracy. Anyway, I was never the biggest fan of Dick Tracy. I always thought he was kind of neat, but never really had any appeal to me. But here, this gives me a character, basically, this character has a lot of depth to him. He's got his own ethics code. He's dealing with a lot of trauma of his own. And the mystery, while it's kind of like it's not really much of a mystery, as it is more like it's an adventure, because the mystery you pretty much solve it pretty fast, as well as like who's working for the big villain of the story, Big Boy Caprice. So you kind of figured that out real fast. Anyway, all in all, though, I do recommend this comic if you want to check out some good pulp stories, because I know Dynamite used to be big on that. Now they don't have that anymore. Yeah, I say give this a look. But anyway, Chris, thank you once again for sending me this comic. And other than that, I hope you all enjoyed this. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.